Tonight, we're going to be talking about a very sensitive topic. We began several weeks ago a mini-series about morality and bioethics. Last week was about the sanctity of life versus the Nuremberg defense. At times of war, as you know, soldiers and generals don't have that much of regard for life, for human life. It's all about winning the war. And this, of course, was a big problem in World War II, when there was wanton murder of innocent life. It was not just about two sides fighting each other. A lot of innocent victims, millions of innocent victims, not just Jewish. I think there were 50 million people who lost their life in World War II. Across the globe, tremendous tragedy. And those who were responsible for a great deal of this tragedy, the Germans, the Nazis, were tried. And they attempted to use the excuse that they were just following orders. And in that lecture, I explained how that excuse, that line of defense, was totally rejected in World War II. Apparently, human life is precious. And we do have moral choices. And they should have disobeyed an unjust law. But these atrocities committed at a time of war are being committed at times of peace. And this is happening through abortion. So tonight's topic is about the sanctity of life versus abortion. The sanctity of potential life. Human beings, couples, men and women about to get married, were always aware of their responsibility in bearing children, in bringing human life into this world. There was always a certain awareness of the responsibility and the burden it carries. Human life was always considered something special, something dear, not just to the women, not just to mothers, but to society as a whole. We all contribute, hopefully, in a positive way. And therefore, the more life, the better. In Latin America, where I was raised, human life is not just precious, it has tremendous value. Many families have many kids. And it's not something selfish. It's not just about wanting to have help around the house. They really love their kids. They really see every child as a blessing. It just happens to be that they also perceive the value that every child, whether it's a boy or a girl, contributes to the family, to society as a whole. Today, however, the 20th and 21st century, the perception has changed a lot. The perception has changed as a result of many unfortunate abnormal births for all kinds of reasons. Birth control considerations, and if you live in China, you have to deal with the population control by the government, who has its own concerns. Then you have the debate. The debate, especially in liberal countries, like the United States, which, by the way, was not such a liberal country when it started off 200 years ago. If the founders of this country, the ones who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the ones who put together the Constitution, if they were to wake up and see what's going on in this country today, they would go back into their graves right away. They would be shocked. This is not what they anticipated. This is not exactly the type of country they had in mind. Even though there are certain liberties today that we take for granted, but are important, this country has changed a lot. So therefore, the debate of the two camps, as they're called in this country, those who are pro-life and those who are pro-choice, is very, very vociferous, very, very strong, very much felt in this country and in other liberal countries, because this country has become so liberal, because this is a generation where people are really seeking comfort. And when you seek comfort, and when you become more materialistic and more secular, it's automatic that people become more selfish, more into themselves, and therefore would like to shirk off responsibilities, have less children. And they would rather have a dog. Yes, that's becoming the American dream. A house and a dog. Not children. Raising children, that's too difficult. So many of the values that were held so dear in the past are being trampled. People are no longer happy as much as they were in the past to just have more and more children. They don't see it as a blessing. You also have equal rights. Women seeking equal rights. And we can understand to a certain extent that in the past they were abused. They did not have equal rights. They were not even able to vote. So we can understand a little bit the revolution that happened in this country and in other countries where women sought equal rights. But in some countries this has gone too far, where they want to make all the decisions, even though this decision about a potential life is not just a simple decision. Who's to say that the human being, after a child is already developing, can make a decision, can be the judge, the executioner, to determine whether this potential life will live, will survive? It's not so simple. To make matters worse, physicians, doctors, think that they are in a position to decide for the woman. Remember, a doctor is only a technical expert. He's not a moral expert. This is about morality. This is not just about medicine. But that is what's going on in the legislature. States have here in this country different opinions, different approaches to legalizing abortion, at what stage to legalize it. It's an ongoing debate. And of course, we must not forget that because secularism is so strong today, religion is weaker as a whole, people have less regard for those religious values, whatever they may be. And across the board, I think, very much all religions agree that life is precious and it should not just be destroyed for any reason. So a secular society will obviously look at this very, very differently. So it doesn't come as a surprise that abortion today is seen as something that the woman or her husband or the two of them should really be the ones to make the decision, instead of some belief in a higher divine law that determines whether something is right or something is wrong. Right and wrong, good and evil, is really not for human beings to decide. As I've explained in the past, it's not easy for people to come up with clear-cut laws about what is right and what is wrong. Only a divine law can prescribe that. Now, what I don't want to do in this lecture is go through the Jewish perspective in halacha. In other words, as far as all the rules pertaining to this subject. This is a complex subject, even in Judaism, in halacha. It is complex, and every situation is unique. And if some problem arises, there could be all kinds of problems, all kinds of complications. A rabbi who's an expert in this field, who's competent, needs to be consulted. So we cannot really, in an hour or so, try to cover all the ramifications, the halachic ramifications as to what is permissible and what is not. Instead, what I want to do is just give a general overview of the topic not from a Jewish perspective, of course, from a religious perspective, in underscoring how important a decision this is for the woman, for the mother, not to be taken lightly. Some of my notes here are excerpts from a piece written by Rabbi Emanuel Jacobowitz. There are a few articles that cover this topic in depth, and I found them very valuable. There's a lot of literature out there, statistics in the Jewish world and in the non-Jewish world as to how many abortions occur every year and how it is being done, the various methods being done. I don't want to get into all the details of that because it will just encumber you with too much information, and we're rather focused here on why is abortion looked at so negatively in religious circles, why it is even risky for the woman to undergo this kind of procedure. This is more important for us. The reason why it's important is because there are many women who may be listening to this lecture, who may have this dilemma of what to do, who may have a unwanted or unexpected pregnancy to deal with. So it's not that important that we try to figure out all the details of how to go about it. We first want to know why it's not so right, why it's not so simple. That is much more important, and that's what I want to concentrate on. Judaism is very emphatic. In other words, it's very, very clear that moral conduct, as I've explained in the previous lectures, is not something that public opinion can decide on, that an individual can figure out on his own through his conscience or whatever. It's much more complex. As I've explained, there are times where there's even conflicts between two systems of ethics and morality. So we need some guidelines. Judaism has these guidelines because the Torah that we have is derived from Sinai. We have a divine law. And this divine law, which is further expounded by our rabbis, by our sages, guides us and tells us right from wrong, what to do. And it is clear in our sources, there's no doubt about it, that life is precious, whether it's life as we know it or potential life. Potential life is the life that is developing in a woman's womb for 9 months. And this potential life has 3 partners: God, the Father, and the Mother. Everybody just thinks about the Father and the Mother because they think about the biology that is behind the creation of another human being. But as the rabbis tell us, the Father contributes, the Mother contributes, each one contributes something to that fetus, but God is the one that endows or gives that fetus the senses, the ability to see, to hear, and the soul. So the human spark is really coming from God. It's not just about the molecules that are being assembled through the Father and the Mother. God is a partner in this creation. And we are not in that position to tell God we're not happy that this is a girl. We wanted a boy. Yes, some people don't like girls. And I tell it to all the people who celebrate when a boy is born, you should be as happy and celebrate when a girl is born. A future mother that will bear children. Why are you more happy that it's a boy? Be thankful that he or she is healthy. Be thankful that you have a child. Some people don't have kids, cannot have kids, would love to have kids. Then you have those that throw the baby in the garbage dumpster because they didn't want it. I mean, incredible. To the level that people are willing to resort to get rid of a human life. So here, I started telling you about the Nazis, about war, about killing. What's this? This is not killing? Well, some people say it's not, because so long as the child is not born, it's not human life. Are they right or are they wrong? That's part of the debate. In some ways, they're not wrong, because the baby, as it's developing, even in Judaism, has a different status than a real live human being. We know that in an example, in a clear example, where the mother's health, her life, is being endangered as a result of this pregnancy. Where Judaism agrees that the mother's life comes first, however, it does not allow the abortion of the child or the termination of the pregnancy if that baby's head came out. Once the baby's head came out, once there is a live birth, then he's a human being just as much as his mother. And we cannot say the mother's life comes before the baby. You cannot terminate that pregnancy anymore once the baby's head is out. So in Judaism, we have clear examples when the mother's health is in danger. And you will see, if you read a little bit about this topic, about the position of Judaism in general, in the area of abortion, that Judaism is not as rigid as Catholicism. Catholicism, unless they've changed their rulings, the last I heard and the last I read, was very rigid that all life is sacred from the very beginning, from conception until the child is born, meaning that regardless of the reasons, you can't abort. The child, the potential for life is sacred. In other words, the fetus is sacred. So that's very rigid. We're not as permissive or as flexible as the Protestants, who have all kinds of situations where they allow for abortion. It's somewhere in between, you may say. But again, it's not a simple matter to decide. I gave an easy example, the example where there's pretty much consensus that if the mother's life is in danger and that baby hasn't been born yet, that it may be terminated. Unfortunately, that sometimes happens. It's hard. It's very, very hard. The mother has carried this baby for so long. To terminate it, well, especially when she doesn't want to terminate, it's difficult, but her life comes first. Why does the mother come first? For what? Because of the reasons we said before. The status of that baby before it is born is different when it is in the mother's womb as opposed to when it is born. In some ways, it's a lower status. Otherwise, if you would not have a different status, why terminate it? Why do we say that give preference to the mother much more? Apparently, while it's still developing in the mother's womb, it does have a different status. There are all kinds of situations in life where the pregnancy could be really a tragedy, in a sense. It could really come about as a result of a tragedy. And one of them is incest, adultery, rape. Now what? It's a tragedy because, obviously, had they thought about it, the two people, they would have been a little bit more careful. So it's a tragedy because of the consequences. An illegitimate child, incest and adultery. I think pretty much every society is very much against. But what do we do about the byproduct here? The child that is being conceived and will be born. Are these examples or reasons to terminate the pregnancy? This is a lot more complicated, perhaps I say, because this is a no-no. Nobody wants this kind of a child. But why is he to blame? Still, if this is a human life, or if this is a potential human life, why should he be to blame because of the sins of the man and woman who brought him into this world? It's raped. It's very sad. It's definitely not desired, definitely not called for. Nobody wants it, but these things happen. Now what? What do we do about it? Well, what if there's some medical exam that determined that a woman is going to have a child with a deformity, Chas v'shalom, God forbid? Now what? You see, these are all examples. Now, all I can tell you, all I'm willing to say, is that it is very, very important to get immediate help after something happens and not to wait for the child to develop. Because there is some room for leniency sometimes at the very early stages of pregnancy. I'm not going to say when, I'm not going to say how. All I'm going to say is that there is more leniency early on, the first few days, the first few weeks. Once you've gone into the first, second trimester, it's much more difficult, much more complicated. For the mother too. You know how many women, as a result of especially a late-term abortion, have become sterile as a result, or have died as a result of the abortion. So it becomes more complicated, more difficult, halachically and morally, however you want to look at it. So that's all I'm prepared to say, that if something ever happens, which is very, very tragic, very sudden, very much not the norm, get immediate help, immediately. And hopefully, you know, with the proper guidance from good counselors, from a rabbi, if you're Jewish, they will determine what's the best recourse to dealing with this situation. Because every situation is unique. We cannot give the answer to all the possibilities that exist. All I'm saying is, in the very beginning, one should get help and not just wait, think about it, make decisions on their own, but to consult with the professionals. You have sometimes a woman who, if she has additional children, she will be suicidal. There will be a psychiatric problem. That is also related to her health. That's also something that needs to be evaluated and considered whether the pregnancy has to be terminated. So you see, there's all kinds of situations. And there may be some that I didn't even mention. It's not for the mother and father alone to decide. It really requires people who are professionals, experts, they have experience, and who value life, who are not just going to give up on this and going to terminate it regardless, who are going to really evaluate the situation properly, who are sensitive. Not everyone is like that. I mean, there are people who will say, yes, come in tomorrow morning, we'll take care of it. And I'm going to show you at the very end a short film that was put together quite a few years ago, but it's still very relevant. That basically, what you get from it is not only a graphic description of what happens in an abortion, you come away from it understanding that a lot of these abortions could have been avoided had the woman understood exactly what is happening to her and what is happening to the baby. A lot of people are ignorant. And that is why I'm saying it's very important that one get proper guidance and become informed as to what is going on in their body. You know what really, really is sad? It can make you cry. That a lot of women who wanted to have an abortion and at the end decided not, and had a healthy baby, they're all very, very happy. No one ever regretted, that I know of, having a baby after considering their abortion. But you know how many women regretted having the abortion after the fact? You can see them cry. You will see them cry in the film. Very painful, you can't take it back. Had they been informed, it would have made a world of a difference. Lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, or making quick decisions is what gets them into trouble. The question really is, why is abortion something that, at least Judaism, from a Jewish perspective, why is it looked down? Why are we being so strict in dealing with abortion? Why not let the woman decide? After all, it is a part of her body. It is, you know. So why are we so strict about it? It's important to always keep in mind that potential life is life. In other words, just because at this moment, as the baby is growing, as the limbs are developing, it is not a real life, it is still dependent on its mother, it's still, if you leave it alone, it will come out to be a real human being. And that real human being can one of these days become president of the United States. Can be a very important individual. We're talking about potential life. So why are we strict? Why be so strict about it? Why really look at it in such a bad way, that this is so terrible, that this is almost tantamount to murder? Because this is pretty much almost a human life. And in Judaism, in halacha, there may be some differences, whether somebody killed a real human being or whether somebody killed a fetus. There may be some differences. But that's not the point. As we said before, yes, the status is different. We are being strict with this area called abortion because the potential of human life is so great. This is not just another animal. The human being is the crown of creation. It is for him that the world was created. It's all for him. Millions of abortions happen every year. And the rabbis tell us, imagine, saving a human life is like saving an entire world. It's like you save millions of people, one human being. You know how many children he will have, grandchildren, one human being. So saving one individual is like saving an entire world. Millions of abortions. 44 million, I forget already what the number is, every year. For all kinds of reasons, all over the world. Still, could you imagine, the potential of what all those human beings would contribute? Saving one life is like saving an entire world. Well, imagine saving all these people. But you have some who will say, it is cruel to insist that the woman carry the child to the end if she doesn't want it. Some will say this law is cruel. What do we say to that? No. Laws are sometimes cruel. Yes. It is necessary to maintain public moral standards. Some of those laws, therefore, may be cruel. What can we do? I want to share with you a story that is brought down in, I think it's in Sefer Hasidim, of a father who came to a big rabbi worrying about the fact that he may have another child. He says, what are you worried about? He says, I can barely make it. I already have a son, I have a daughter, more children. It is going to be difficult. My livelihood is, I'm just barely making it. And this story actually touches on another concern that many, many people have. They just can't afford it. Rabbi, I'm worried about it. And the rabbi tells him, our tradition is very clear that the mother receives her milk before the child is even born. In other words, the child's livelihood, his parnasah, is already prepared for him. Even before he's born, God takes care of him. That's not something that you need to worry about. God takes care of all his creatures. He provides for all of us. He has already provided for your future baby. Why worry about it? Anyway, that man had another boy. And as the child grew, one day he became very sick, and this man, this father, ran to the rabbi. Please pray for him, he's sick. Oh, now you want me to pray for him that he should live? And before you didn't want to? A lot of it has to do with a lack of faith, a lack of bitachon, a lack of confidence or reliance in God who provides. A lot of people, therefore, are worried because of this lack of faith in God who takes care of all of us. That is where the problem comes from. Or at least that's where part of the problem comes from. So what should we do? What should society do if there are children that are born with certain physical handicaps? Other than, just tell them to have the child. It is a difficulty. No one is denying that it's a burden. But the proper way to deal with handicaps is for society, for the government to take responsibility, the community to take responsibility in helping such a family. Just because you know in advance that this is going to happen is not enough of a reason to stop it. I tell people who are in a similar situation, tell me, what if your child, God forbid, is 10 years old and he's very, very sick? Wouldn't you do everything for him? What if, God forbid, something happened and there was an accident? And people, in accidents, they lose a limb, they become somewhat paralyzed. You would do everything for them. You would care about them. You would continue to provide and support them, even though they're right now in that kind of a state, physical state. Then why not behave the same way when the child is in the mother's womb? There's a handicap. Well, perhaps you need to take care of it. The Kabbalah goes more into it in explaining why these things happen. But that's not for this lecture. I may have covered, I believe, these points in other lectures as to why certain things happen to people. Why are certain children born with certain physical limitations? Why are certain kids deformed from birth? Why are they taken from this world before their time? We've spoken about these topics before. So the Kabbalah goes into the why these things happen. Why was she raped? Why was this woman raped? We're not talking about where two people intentionally commit a sin. No, obviously that's their free will. That was not preordained from above. But rape and things of that nature, the Kabbalah goes into it a little bit more as to why certain things happen. In a world where we believe that everything is directed or supervised from above, except for those areas where we have free will, there's an explanation for everything. Things don't just happen by chance. We have to act accordingly. We must be careful how we react, how we deal with certain situations. But the fact that they happened is beyond our control. It doesn't mean that we have to find a remedy called abortion to get rid of this accident. That's not a remedy. That's not a relief for this kind of a problem. Just like euthanasia or suicide is not a real escape of some pain or suffering that somebody's going through. And we'll talk about that separately. Euthanasia and suicide. which is also related to this topic of sanctity of life. If we properly value life, then we will think differently about all these topics. But just briefly, how do we look at incest? Incest, we said, is reprehensible. It is something we wish it would not happen. But unfortunately, the biology sometimes works, and children are born as a result of this illicit relationship. Why not make that an exception? Let's just say this should be an exception. This was totally wrong, it's a mistake. Why should we be strict even in this area? In general, I'm saying in general we're strict even in this area. And the answer is very simple. If we were not strict in this area, you know what would happen? People would be much more promiscuous. And there would be more debauchery, permissiveness. And they wouldn't care. After all, there's no responsibility. They can do what they want. And they're not accountable almost. So can you see why there has to be some sort of deterrent? And you know what kind of a deterrent exists in Judaism? That the child born through incest has various limitations as to who he can marry. The sin is being exposed. They committed something in private, but eventually it's going to be exposed. What shame this will bring them. So it would be nice, that's what they think, the ones who committed the transgression. It would be nice to just hide everything and get rid of it as though nothing happened. No. God didn't want it that way. He wanted to expose. Exposing certain sins is a necessity. It acts as a deterrent. A deterrent is necessary in certain areas of life. What can we do? In order to prevent people from just being carried away and doing anything they'd like to. There was one big rabbi who was once asked about legalizing brothels, I think it was. And he said, why would you want to legalize that? I mean, why would you want it to exist? Why would you want us not to protest something like that? That it is terrible for it to be in our neighborhood. He says, because if you don't legalize it, people are going to have abortions, which is worse. Two wrongs don't make a right. In other words, just because people may do something worse doesn't mean that you shouldn't get up and not protest even a smaller evil. If it's wrong, you need to protest. You can't just go along with it. Anybody who does not protest is basically going along with it. He's saying it's okay with me. I don't mind. And we can never have that kind of an attitude when something is clearly wrong, even though this may lead certain individuals to commit a worse transgression. If something is wrong, it's wrong. So we cannot just be tolerant of certain things that we know are very, very wrong. Before I show you the film, I need to remind those people who think that they can get away with it and that nothing will happen to them if they do go ahead and abort a fetus that should not have been aborted. We have a clear tradition. The rabbis tell us that many, many natural disasters happen in the world because of this type of murder. In other words, the murder of innocent children who, even though they were not born yet, had this potential for life. Now, even though, as we said before, the Kabbalah explains why these souls needed to be aborted, needed to be in a mother's womb who will eventually abort them, regardless of why they needed to go through that, those individuals who committed this sin are guilty. And sometimes we don't know why certain natural disasters occur, but one of the reasons is because of this. Where there are millions of abortions, you think that God, who's a partner in the creation of the human being, is just going to sit back and do nothing and allow this to happen? he sends us a message, a clear message that this is wrong. So many natural disasters could be just because of this, because we're talking about millions. The Zohar continues to tell us that when one, whether it's the father or mother, regardless, aborts a fetus, he distanced the Shekhinah, the divine presence, from the world. And as a result of that, brings himself a lot of trouble. A lot of people have a hard time with anything that is moral. They would love it to be easy, where they can just do anything they want. But I hope I've explained that already in the past, that life requires certain responsibilities. When you get your license to drive, you have to learn how to drive. It's dangerous. You may kill someone. We need to assert responsibilities in life. We can't just act the way we want to. We need laws. We need rules. We're half animal. And we don't always see objectively what is right from what is wrong. So we need certain standards, moral, ethical standards, that are really a priori. A priori means that the human conscience understands on its own that this is wrong. Yes, there are times when we need to make a decision if to terminate the pregnancy, but not to do it on our own, because we don't really see things so objectively. We don't know all the facts. And because of that, we make mistakes. And it would be a shame, and it would be very painful to later regret making such a mistake of destroying a potential human life that could have brought so much happiness to the parents. How painful it would be later on to regret that. So in order to bring this home, this point, I think that this film will do some justice to it. So perhaps we'll go over now to the film.
My name is Bernard N. Nathanson. I'm a physician, practicing obstetrician and gynecologist. And I think I've had a passing experience in matters of abortion. Now, when I was a medical student in 1949, we had no such science as fetology. We were taught that the unborn child, the fetus, was something in the uterus, but it was really an article of faith as to whether or not it was a human being and whether or not that human being had any unique personal qualities. Now, for the first time, we're going to see a film made with real-time ultrasound imaging. For instance, a late abortion. This is one of the 4,000 or so a day done every day in the United States. This film was made at an abortion clinic. Now, let's turn to the actual film itself. We are now looking at a sector scan of a real-time ultrasound imaging of a 12-week unborn child. The child is orientated in this direction. You are looking now at the head of the child here, the body of the child here, and this image is the child's hand approaching its mouth. Looking a little more closely at the child, we can discern the eye, or the orbit of the eye, here, the nose of the child here, the mouth of the child here, and we can even look at the ventricle of the brain here. This is a fluid-filled space in the brain. We see the body of the child here with the ribs in silhouette and the spine of the child at the back. This rather granular area of tissue at the top of the sector appears to be the placenta, or afterbirth, of the child. And we can begin to see down here the thighs, the lower extremities of the child coming off the body in this manner. Now, let's move to the action. We now see the heart beating here in the child's chest. The heart is beating at a rate of approximately 140 a minute. And we can see the child moving rather serenely in the uterus. One can see it shifting position from time to time. It is still orientated in this manner. And the mouth is receiving the thumb of the child. The child again is moving quietly in its sanctuary. Now, this shadow which we are seeing down at the bottom of the screen is the suction tip. We have colored the suction tip deliberately in order for you to discern it more clearly. But the abortionist has now dilated the cervix and is now inserting this suction tip, which you can see moving back and forth across the screen. You will note that as the suction tip, which is now over here, moves toward the child will rear away from it and undergo much more violent, much more agitated movements. The child is now moving in a much more purposeful manner. Its orientation changes from time to time. It is rearing again here. Now, the suction tip has not actually touched the child, even though the child is extremely agitated and moving in a violent manner. The child has now moved back to the profile view, and the suction tip is flashing once again across the screen. The child's mouth is now open, and we will see that again on a freeze frame in a moment. But this suction tip, which you can see moving violently back and forth on the bottom of the screen, is the lethal instrument which will ultimately tear apart and destroy the child. It is only after the fluid has been broken, the sac has been disrupted, that the tip will actually come against the child. But we can see the tip moving back and forth as the abortionist seeks the child's body. Once again, we see the child's mouth wide open in a silent scream in this particular freeze frame. This is the silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction. Now, the heart rate has speeded up dramatically, and the child's movements are violent at this point. It does sense aggression in its sanctuary. It is moving away. One can see it moving to the left side of the uterus in an attempt, a pathetic attempt, to escape the inexorable instruments which the abortionist is using to extinguish its life. Now, the heart has again perceptibly speeded up. We can time this at approximately 200 beats per minute. And there is no question this child senses the most mortal danger imaginable. The membrane has now been punctured and the fluid has escaped. One no longer sees that large reservoir of fluid surrounding the child. But once the fluid has been drained off, the suction tip has now been firmly clamped to the child's body, and the child is being pulled in a downward direction by the abortionist's suction tip with the negative pressure applied to it, and the body is now being torn systematically from the head of the child being in this direction here. I am now outlining the child's head. The lower extremities have already been lost, and we see the suction tip flashing from time to time in the screen as a typhoon-like series of echoes, and the child is being tugged back and forth as the suction tip has now been applied to the body, and the abortionist is exerting his traction on the child in this manner. The child's head is still discernible here. The body is no longer discernible. It has now been torn from the head. What we see now is the head itself with what is called the midline echo of the head and the spicules or fragments of bone. Now this head, which I'm outlining here, on this 12-week child is simply too large to be pulled in one piece out of the uterus. The abortionist is going to have to employ this instrument, the polyp forceps, In an attempt to grab the head, the abortionist will attempt to crush the head with this instrument in this manner and remove the head piecemeal from the uterus. The abortionist and the anesthesiologist have a secret language between them which shields them from the grisly reality of what is going on. The abortionist and the anesthesiologist together refer to the head of this child, which is now being sought, as number one. And the anesthesiologist will inquire of the abortionist, is number one out yet? Are we finished? We now see intermittently the shanks or blades of this instrument appearing in the image here. The head tends to float freely in the uterus. Here are the shanks or blades of the instrument coming across here. And the head is now being locked on by this polyp forceps, and the head is being pulled down toward the cervix. Now all we see remaining are simply the shards, the broken fragments, the pieces of tissue which document that there was once a living, defenseless, tiny human being here. Of abortion in our society, let's look at some figures as to what has actually happened in the last 20 years. We have reliable figures indicating that in 1963, long before abortion became legalized by the infamous Roe v. Wade decision, there were approximately 100,000 illegal abortions done annually in the United States, and very few legal abortions. When discussing abortion, we must also understand that the unborn child is not the only victim. Women themselves are victims just as the unborn children are. Women have not been told of the true nature of the unborn child. They have not been shown the true facts of what an abortion really is. Women in increasing numbers, hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands, have had their wombs perforated, infected, destroyed. Women have been sterilized and castrated, all as a result of an operation of which they have had no true knowledge. This film, and other films which may follow like it, must be made a part of the informed consent for any woman before she submits herself to a procedure of this sort. I accuse the National Abortion Rights Action League, I accuse Planned Parenthood and all its co-conspirators in the abortion industry of a consistent conspiracy of silence, of keeping women in the dark with respect to the true nature of abortion. And I challenge all those purveyors of abortion to show this real-time videotape or one similar to it to all women before they consent to abortion.
All right, so I think you can all see how painful this is to watch, even in a movie, the more so in real life, how painful it is for the women and for the would-have-been fathers had they known what they're going through. I just would like to add that whoever does want to save their child, who does need guidance, and is part of the Jewish community, there's an organization called the Frat in Israel that very much guides and supports, both financially and emotionally, any woman who may need help of any kind. And before she goes ahead with this procedure, she should definitely consult with them, and they will reassure her that it's not so bad after all, to have a child. On the contrary, it's the most beautiful and the most rewarding gift that one could ever imagine having. So it's all about being informed. I very much believe, very, very strongly believe, that people who understand that life has a purpose, life has meaning, that God exists, that there is something called a soul, and that there's life after death, would have a completely different attitude towards potential life. Those that don't have any understanding about life after death, about the human soul, about the purpose of life, then they look at life as an accident. We're just here by accident. It was a big bang. You know, somehow we just came to being, a bunch of molecules without any purpose in life. Obviously, to these types of individuals, life does not make sense and is therefore easily disposable. I think what everyone should do from time to time is to contemplate life, and if possible, to look at a video of how life begins from the very first drop until that baby comes out of the mother's womb. And they will for sure be convinced that this is the greatest miracle of all, the miracle called life. Thank you.